Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. If you are ever in my lives, I always open up the same way because I do think it's so super cool that we can come together no matter where we are in the world, and regardless of what the time is, where you are located, we all can come together in one place and have amazing conversation. As you know, Wednesdays at 9 a.m. is my Caff-AI Chats, where we talk about all things AI related, because I talk about how my platform altogether is sales, AI, and humanity, and how to bring them all together. And, AI is something that is super exciting when we're using it for good. So I love to share some great experts in this space. This week, we have Nate, and I'll let him do his own introduction. But before we kick this off, I want to know where everyone's located, because again, we can be anywhere in the world. So I'm here in Houston, Texas. Nate, where are you from?
I am in Atlanta, Georgia.
Which I love Atlanta, by the way. If you've not been to Atlanta, you need to go check it out. It is a fun city. And I think probably the area I love the most has got to be, because that's where I was more familiar, was there in the perimeter area. Love that area.
Yeah, definitely. There's some really cool neighborhoods, and Atlanta's done a fantastic job of creating like walkable spaces. And there's also some really good breweries if you're into that. Mm-hmm. And then their aquarium is my favorite. I've got a 2.5-year-old and we've got a 3-week-old, and my 2.5-year-old just absolutely loves the aquarium. It's one of the funnest things we do as a family. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
We have one here in Houston, but it's super small. So you can go in and be out on the other side within, I don't know, I'm not a museum person, nor am I necessarily a super aquarium. So I can go in and out pretty quickly. So maybe I'm not a great one to share kind of my experience, but overall you can go through very quickly. So I love that that there is a possibility that the Atlanta one is better than the Houston one.
It's a fantastic one. We've been to some good ones, but the Atlanta one is up there. So yeah.
Where do you what do you think is your most favorite?
I think it's going to be the 3 that I've been the most impressed with. Chicago has an amazing aquarium right on the lake. And then of course, Monterey, California also has a fantastic aquarium. Atlanta is pretty unique in that it's like a 3-story tall tank with sharks, and they have a turtle that has to be 200 or 300 pounds and probably at least 100 years old in there, and it's just amazing. So
that's awesome. Really okay, cool. So the next time I go to Atlanta, I am going to put it on my bucket list that I need to go visit the aquarium.
Yes, very good.
And I have been to Chicago a million times, as I have Atlanta, and I never even realized that Chicago had an aquarium. So I need to go check that out as well. Because that was your number one, right?
It depends. So Chicago, I have a hard time picking a number one. Chicago had really good lake fish because it's on Lake Michigan.
Right.
And then the Monterey Aquarium had really good like Pacific Ocean, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah. Okay.
All right. Well,
another honorable mention is the Cincinnati Aquarium. They have a go touch a penguin experience, and you
can
go behind the scenes and actually pet their penguins. And that my wife loves penguins, so we did that for a date one time. It was really fun. So
that's awesome. Wow, you are a good date.
I try. I have more stories of failures than successes in that area, but at least we keep trying, right? So,
well, I mean, progress over perfection, right?
That's right.
All right. Well, we're not here to talk about our dating lives, but I do love that Nate is joining us. So, I'm not going to introduce Nate myself. He really can. I probably would not do him justice. So I'll let him do that in a second. But interestingly enough, I met Nate in a small group. So it's been a few months now. It was before Christmas, I think. Yeah, it was in the fall sometime that I met Nate through a sales group that we belong to. So huge shout out to James Schneider. If you don't know James, go check him out. And I'll drop his name in the comments below. But we met through James on an intimate call that we had. And I don't know, Nate is just cool. But while Nate is cool, I love what he's doing in the AI space, because he has a specific solution that speaks to what I think is the humanity aspect of the business world, right? And while that's only really one use case, it's the one that resonates the most with me, and hence why I really wanted to get to know Nate a bit more, and why, you know, I think he's just a phenomenal person, because at the heart of everything, he really has humanity in his, you know, in his soul, right? I mean, we're all human, so we all have to relate to humanity in some way or another. But when he thinks about what he does and how he does it, and just to the kindness in his soul, I mean, he's very human driven, human focused. And in this world of AI, that is most certainly what is going to differentiate us. So I've done enough. I will now pass it on over to Nate. So Nate, please introduce yourself to everyone. I appreciate you being here. You take it over.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Denise. That was a great lead up. So I'm Nate Kaemingk. I always have to tell people how to pronounce my last name. It's a Dutch name, and so I won't get into all that. But I actually started as a mechanical engineer. And as a mechanical engineer, I learned a whole bunch of math and inferential statistics, like super nerd level.
That is
even
very nerdy.
right? And then I went and did my MBA. And in the MBA, I had a whole bunch of commercial bankers say, like, hey, we've never seen anybody with this math doing business forecasting like you're doing it. So I figured out I had something. And then I had a chance to do it with billions of dollars at Cummins. If anyone has ever seen or heard of Cummins Diesel, Fortune 500 company, I think they're over $30 billion a year at this point in sales. That was awesome, right? Like I got to do that at an age where probably nobody had business doing it, but it was just because I had the math. So eventually that turned into when my wife and I decided to take a sabbatical, and we actually sold the house, bought an RV, and drove around the country for 3 years, which was awesome. Yeah, it was. I would recommend if anyone has a chance to do something like that, do it. But while I was on the road, that ended up starting my current business. I got bored, and I was like, I need some math to do or something. So I started doing forecasting as a consultant, just on freelance websites. And one of the things I'm probably the most proud of, and a story I think Denise is referring to, is when COVID happened. I had a client call me and say, hey, I need your help. We're in trouble. 30% of their business had gone away when COVID hit. And so what his heart was, the CEO and myself, we partnered on this, was we have to find a way to, number one, remain solvent as a business so we can keep all of our, keep the employees we can. But the second primary thing was, can we get through this with no layoffs? And what's beautiful about that story, and it's one of the reasons I'm the most proud of it, is that we were able to maintain and save, I think it was 9 different jobs, that we were considering, and we found a way to save those jobs. What I love about saving the jobs is I know the families, right? I know the families. I know that they're dads, they have kids, they're families that, if the dad lost the job, he might have to go get work somewhere else, and, all of that stuff. And so what's beautiful is, yes, we did the right thing by those families. But we also, because of that work, the business benefit we had is that come 2021, we had more business than we could do. We had more business than we'd ever had in the history of the company. And all those people we considered laying off, we kept them busy, and we actually needed to hire 10 more. Part of it was because we were the only people that had people. We were the only ones that didn't lay anybody off. And so we actually had a massive return on investment for doing the right thing and saving the families involved. And so when I talk about AI, I'm doing a lot of AI application in forecasting. And one of my primary goals is always business continuity. But it's not just cash, it's not just the hard financial continuities. It's, well, what can we do to maintain the hardest thing? Headcount, people is the most, it's typically the largest cost on any company's expenses. And if we see it as an expense instead of recognizing that it's a strategic investment, then we're going to miss out on the fact that the people in our business are actually the most important. And so even in AI, that's actually becoming more true. I know there's all this talk about AI is going to replace people, and I think there is some of that, but I would consider most AIs to be a very entry level skill set. Like they have the ability to maybe handle some very entry level or administrative minutia of tasks, but they're not really strategic thinkers. They need oversight. They don't have the ability to look at the big picture or to look at the things that the unintended consequences of their questions. They're very, very good at answering direct questions, but they're not very good at thinking outside the box, so to speak, right? That takes people. That takes investment in the right people, the people that understand your business. So I'm on a little bit of a soapbox there, but that's my why I care so much about AI. And I think that's what Denise and I really connected on.
Yeah, because, for me, if you think about it, where we connected was in the sales group. And when I think about tech sales, we saw a lot of layoffs last year and again at the beginning of this year, right? So last year was just insane. And when we thought it had reduced or quieted down, all of a sudden we saw a surge of that again at the beginning of this year. And what companies don't understand is first off, when you lay someone off, you're eventually going to hire them back. You're going to hire their positions back. And what is frustrating is when you see an organization who just willy-nilly does that, and then they've got to hire those people back. So they spent all this money to onboard their employee. Then they let them go and have to pay a severance package. And then they have to rehire at some point and onboard again. So take out the fact that when you lay someone off, it can crush them, right? Mentally, financially, professionally. I mean, it can just crush a soul, right? But then add the fact that when companies do that willy-nilly, they're also costing themselves much more money in the long term than if they would have just figured out how to solve to their problem at the immediate. And we just saw an example of this with what's his name, Elon Musk, who laid off all of these people, and now he's asking them to come back, right? And if he could have, now I don't know what his reason was for the layoff, but the reality is if they have a solution, if an organization has a solution like what you offer in place, they can prevent, maybe not in that immediate. So it's, if Elon would have bought your solution today, it would not have saved what he already did. But if he'd have bought your solution 6 months ago, he could have done a better job of ensuring that he had his finances in place so that he wouldn't have had to lay off. And he could have seen the potential negative implications of having laid off those people before he even did, so that he could have avoided the mess altogether.
Yeah. And the other thing I found, because we discussed layoffs during that time, during COVID, right? 30% of our business went out the window in 1 month. I mean, not very many businesses can survive that, much less even consider, am I going to hang on to my people? And so we did a bunch of financial analysis, and I think there was maybe a list of 11 different things we could go do. And what I did was said, okay, well, which of these 11 things are going to have the best impact on our cash? And we, of course, had several executive leaders that were saying, well, we've got to do layoffs. We don't have a choice, right? We don't want to protect these 20% and cost 100% of our people their work, because the company could go under, right?
Yeah.
That's the trade-off we have to make. But what we found 3 other things we could go do that were better for cash than layoffs. And it was because we took the time to do the analysis. Now, I want to qualify that. The issue is that most people run into is that the industry standard or the best practice in terms of financial forecasting is very labor intensive. Like, it's very difficult to go build a forecast for 11 different scenarios when you've got a timer running saying we're going to be out of cash in a certain amount of time. And if we don't make a decision now, we're going to end up losing everything. Like I say this a lot. Sometimes what happens is you get into what's called fight or flight mode, right? We've all got this fight or flight thing in our brains where it's how our brains are hardwired, that when stuff gets scary, we're going to either fight it, we're going to stay there and we're going to figure out a way to make it happen, or we're going to run away. You're not very creative during those times. And so what we're trying to do as a company is we actually build using AI and using some of these technologies. Now, we're not using large language models, and I can get into that in a little bit, what segment of AI. We're building a digital twin of a business, a financial digital twin. Excuse me. But the reason we're building a financial digital twin is because it speeds up our analysis time. And that's exactly what's happening with AI. Is it makes it so much faster to get the results in. And we're talking like 90 to 95% of the time is no longer part of the equation because we can get an answer so quickly.
Well, because I want to stop you there for a second, because when I think of in terms of forecasting, even in just sales, right? So regardless of whether it's business oriented or sales oriented, most of it tends to be a manual process that is done by gut check and tribal knowledge, right? And therein, with those three factors, and I would suspect there's probably more that I'm not actually, just thinking off the top of my head, but with those three factors, there leaves room for a lot of human error.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. And you're 100% right on. Now, the piece of this that's really key is that we can't do it without that, right? Like, it's really important to pay attention to the gut and the human and like, if you've got somebody that's been in an industry for 25 years, they've got the best BS meter of anybody. And when it comes to doing things with what I'll call inference, and when I say inference, what I mean by that is that's a statistical, we're going to take some sort of model, right? So a large language model is a model. What we're calling ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, they're all what's called a large language model.
Yep.
Models, we're generally going to try to use them to infer some future outcome.
Because models are data collectors, right?
Yes.
The large language models are collecting data and scraping that data, and it is an aggregator of that data. And based on the input that you give it, it will generate some sort of output leveraging that data it's collected.
Yes. And we have to remember what it actually is in the background. This is really important. It's just a mathematical representation of the data that it was given. And so anything that any of these AIs will give you is just going to be as close as it can find in the English language models that it has to what you asked. It's not actually going to make predictions. Now, there is times where you can take, okay, well, here's a model, here's what's happened in the past, and we're going to use that to infer that something similar will happen in the future. That's actually very logical. The issue is typically models do a better job of characterizing existing data than they do of inferring what could happen in the future. There's way more uncertainties in terms of that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm getting over a thing. Excuse me. So when we are using a large language model, we have to understand two things here. The first is that GPT, even the new GPT-4o that we're calling it, which they're touting some statistical analysis that's happening, which I've looked at that quite a bit, and it's pretty basic in terms of statistical analysis. It's not actually that advanced yet, but we're not going to go down that path right now. The issue is that just because that was true in the past doesn't mean it's going to be true in the future. Yep. And so it takes an approach of, okay, here's what could happen. There's maybe an 80% likelihood that the same thing will happen in the future, but what we're not keeping track of is, okay, what are the wild cards that are going to make this be totally different than what happened in the past? Which,
by the way, a wild card is not necessarily a wild card because every day seems to be very dynamic. And so when I think of wild card, I think of it in terms of just the dynamic happenings that occur every single day that are out of our control.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to recognize that there will always be unexpected pieces of the puzzle, and to assume that the data we have is comprehensive and complete is naive, because there will always be some sort of unexpected outside factor. Now, even the statistics that GPT-4o, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I know it was capital or anyways.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
It's characterizing the existing data, but it's not including a consideration for the data we don't have yet. And so anytime you go into inference, predicting of the future, we have to expand and acknowledge that we're going to be less certain when we're making predictions than we are in the certainty of the model itself. And I'm getting a little nerdy here.
That's okay. That's okay.
The reason this is really important is because we can't assume that the model itself with the data that it's given is complete. We have to acknowledge that there's always going to be pieces of the puzzle that we don't have. And you could go scrape 100% of the data that's on the entire internet and it will still be incomplete because we live outside of the internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know we don't want to yes, it's the best data we have, which is fantastic, but it's still incomplete. So we need the human factor. We need the people that understand that there's more to the picture. Our brains are wired to consider outside factors, and GPT models they're not built that way yet.
I do want to come back to that, though.
Okay, good.
Okay. Did I make you lose your train of thought?
No. That was the end of it. That was it's me saying, I love modeling. I've been doing this small data inferential statistics, which is a super nerdy way of saying AI ML. I joke about this. My wife's in marketing. And so I used to call it inferential statistics, and somebody in marketing came along and said, that's horrible. We should call it AI. And okay, yeah, that's better.
Excuse me, that made me snort.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So
because I laugh, and the reason why I laugh about that is because when we want to classify everything under AI, right? Uh-huh. We make AI this huge umbrella, and we just stick something underneath there because AI is the word of the decade right now.
Yeah, the word of the year. It started at the beginning of probably about a year ago or so when GPT 3.0 was launched. I think that was can't remember if it was March or April of 23.
I think it was, it doesn't matter. It was in the spring.
Okay. What's interesting though is if you actually go look at history, there was talk about computer-based AI in the 80s and 90s too. It just wasn't. And everyone at that point in time was saying this is going to be here in 5 years or 10 years. Like the timeline estimation has always been optimistic. And I'm going to say something about Elon. I'm more just kind of joking about this, but it's true. Is that Elon talked about Elon Musk said that self-driving semi-trucks were going to be here. He actually they were going to do their first launch of their self-driving semi-truck in 2016. They finally launched it like 6 or 7 years later, and he said, okay, it's going to be now, it's going to be now, it's going to be now. He's been promising autopilot on his Teslas for 15 years. So the fact that he came out and tweeted that artificial general intelligence is going to be here by next year means that it's probably actually more like 10 years from now.
Probably. At least that should be our hope, right? I mean, because we are seeing things progress at a faster rate now because we have released some of these new technologies. Mm-hmm. But you're right. I mean, really, if you go back and look at history, the first instance of AI happened around 1956 when you had IBM, MIT, and I can't remember who the third partner was when they came together to talk about and launch, what they called it. And I don't know that it was maybe development. So in 1956 was when they came together to develop the first AI. So, it's been around for a really long time. It just so happens that we're hearing more about it now because it was released to the masses back in 22, right? In November of 22. It's been around for a while. And you're right. It's taken a long time. Like timeline has seemed always more optimistic. But I do truly believe that because the release of so many new technologies, that the timelines are getting more and more narrow, meaning that we are seeing those predictions a lot sooner because of just the technology that we're entrenched in right now.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is on the topic of time to release, I mean, that's what I'm working on. I mean, I'm even developing the tool to make it so that you can make financial decisions in, what used to take 3 to 6 weeks to do, we can do in a matter of minutes. And so this is happening in all kinds of spaces around the corner. And if you would take somebody from, let's just pick let's pick 100 years ago. Let's pick 1924. If you would pick somebody from 1924 and showed them some CGI technology. So CGI is your ability to like model the material science of what's happening, right? So I'll pick the Boeing 747 as an example. When they built this and designed the Boeing 747, they did it on paper, like drafting paper, and they had engineers doing calculations by hand, and they built a plane that was, from a safety perspective, was absolutely incredible. And maybe that's a bad example because the 737 has struggled so much, but but now if you look at how much faster you could do exactly the same thing just with technology from the 2000s, the first decade of the 2000s, it would blow their minds that this was even possible. And I think it was Lincoln actually that almost disbanded the patent office and patent law because he thought that everything that was possibly going to be invented had been invented already. Well, that's so not true. So how we think things are happening really fast right now, and they are. It's kind of another exponential from what has occurred over the last 30 years, which, maybe it took 80 years to have as much change as we've had in the last 20 to 30 years. And maybe it's going to take what used to take 20 to 30 years, we're going to do in 2 to 3 years. Right. So, I don't know what that stopping point is. I think if you had asked me 5 years ago, I would have said, oh yeah, well, we're about as fast as things are going to change. And change is going to slow down as we start to figure out this new threshold. It's eventually going to work its way out of the puzzle. And I think we saw that in search. I don't know if anyone else has noticed, but like, have you ever gone and tried to look up a recipe on Google? Like yesterday we were making fajitas and I just wanted to, okay, well, what are the 6 seasonings in a fajita? Well, I had to read an article, read through this person's story, get to the point where they actually listed the ingredients, because that's the only way to get a recipe because of the SEO structure, right?
Yep.
Google ranks a site based on whether or not somebody will scroll down far enough in their page and interact with it to stay at the top. So therefore, all recipes are going to have something that nobody wants to see in any recipe. So I think search was getting to a point where it was actually losing quality because it was kind of plateauing. And now we're looking at here's the next technology, and it's going to be large language models. And eventually large language models are going to hit a plateau as well. I just don't know what that looks like yet.
I don't either. And it's kind of scary because everything is or at least in my perspective and just what I've experienced, it is moving at such a faster pace. And what's the next big thing?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, we're talking about all things AGI and transhumanism. How quickly is that truly a reality? And if so, what does that really look like? Is it going to be just as they predict, where machines are going to actually be able to infer emotion? Right? I don't know. I mean,
yeah, I don't know either. I mean, is it going to be Terminator? Or is it going to be, I can't think of another like utopian AI based movie because Hollywood's obsessed with bad news. But anyways, I think I had a thought here a little bit ago. I think what's interesting is I think it was actually Jeff Bezos that said something about this. And he said in Amazon, when they were building it to get it to the point that they did, what they focused on were what are the needs and desires of their customers that are never going to change. So rather than, I'll quote Bezos and Steve Jobs in this at the same time, right?
Okay.
Steve Jobs said in some of his more popular things and parts of his movies, like I think there's an interview of him where people were saying, well, what about application of this technology? And he said back to them, he said, I don't care what the technology is. I want to start with what the customer needs, and we'll work our way into what technology solves that problem. AI is in a weird place where everybody's talking about the technology and looking for applications, whereas the best way to actually launch and solve problems long term is to start, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And then, what's the right technology to solve that problem? And so I'll talk about my space specifically just because I know it really well, but in my space, people are trying to solve the problem of, well, how do I know what my business is going to look like in 6 months from now? And you have that camp. Okay, well, that's the problem I'm trying to solve. And then you have this really loud market thing over here saying AI is going to solve all of our problems. And so it could be a mistake to say, well, I'm just going to go try to get an LLM, a large language model, to solve that problem. In reality, large language models are actually really bad at math. They're
Which you
not.
talked about already.
We
And
haven't talked. Yeah, we can get to that. It's amazing how often they're wrong. So there's some techniques that. So, okay, I'll pick Dolly as an example. Dolly always gives you 4 images
which, by
because
the
it
way,
knows
most of them are wrong.
exactly, right? So most of them are wrong, and you probably have to prompt it 3 or 4 more times to get to the image you want. Well,
Mhm.
that means it was wrong. So 4 images 4 times is 16 images that it presented you with. That means it was wrong 15 times. And it was only correct 1 time out of 15. Now, we're blown away by the fact that it can get 1 correct out of 16 and how quickly it can get there, which is
And which,
amazing.
by the way, we are accepting of it, right? But
Yeah,
if you're a human, we expect our humans to be 100% accurate, or at least 85 to 100% accurate.
right.
Yet
Like
we are accepting a large language model that is less than, I mean, that's not even 1% accurate in your 1 to 15 ratio.
yeah, it's like 6 or 7%. It's less than 10%. So it's just okay. Now, I think the reason we're accepting of it is because it's new and novel. That's a piece of it. And the other part of it is that well, from my effort perspective, so I have 2 options if I want to go get a really cool graphic made. Well, I have 3, but one is what I used to do, which is I'm going to go to any of the free sites or any of the like picture
Mhm.
sites that I have to pay for, and I'm going to try to find an image that exists already. That's okay. You're going to be correct less often with that. The other option is the expensive option, expensive in terms of money, but also in terms of time. And that's where I'm going to ask a
Mhm.
freelancer or a person to go do this, and it's going to take 3 to 6 weeks, or longer to get the result. Now
Yep.
we're okay with Dolly giving us being wrong 15 times out of 16. Okay, now let me finish the thought on the if you hire a person, you're going to have some discussions. They're going to do a really good job of getting your requirements, but they're still going to present you with multiple options. And eventually you'll get to a correct one and you can provide feedback. So you're still going through the same process. The difference is with Dolly, you're doing it instantaneously and it doesn't
Yep.
really cost you anything, right? Which is impressive. But I do want to acknowledge something else here is that we're talking about what's the consequence of being wrong. That's nobody thought that arts would be the first place that arts and language would be the first place that AI would take over. Well, it ends up being the first place it took over because there's low consequence of being wrong. There's not like a hard right or a hard wrong. Like if I'm wrong on generating an image for a random person 15 times, it doesn't really matter. It costs a little bit of compute power, right? That's the consequence, and maybe 4 extra minutes. But if we move to other places where it's a big deal if we're wrong, right? Mine is a specific example, financial forecasting. I don't have the luxury of being wrong more often than I'm right. The best example we've seen so far, even in finance, we'll call it what's called quant trading. And it's where it's this whole idea of using algorithms to do stock trading.
Mhm.
Those algorithms only have to be right 60% of the time for the company to make money on them. They just have to be right more often than they're wrong, right? So I can make, if I'm right 60% of the time, if I'm able to predict the market 60% of the time, then I make 100 bets. I'm going to win more bets than I lose, and so I'm going to make money. That's what's called quant trading. That's the threshold of capability. In forecasting, I don't have that luxury. I have to be right 95% of the time or more, or more, right? And so it takes humans, it takes review, it takes a lot of process of that. So the math is actually quite different, and I'm working my way into this idea that there's now a new technology space that's focused within AI of we're actually going to try to address the specific issues that large language models have, and that they're actually designed to interpret English. They're not actually designed to be really good at math. They were
Mhm.
never designed from the ground up to be really good at math. And so there's a new space of investigation and work. And even Microsoft has put out articles talking about this, and it's called small math models. And what we're trying to do is, rather than being really good at English as the first goal, let me go back to the problem solving slide of this, right? We're not trying to solve an English language problem or a communication with a computer problem. We're trying to solve a math problem.
Yeah.
And so the engine we're using is going to be a math engine rather than a language engine. Now you have to talk to it differently. That's the piece of this that gets interesting is, well, okay, well, maybe we can combine both technologies and get to where we have a large language model that talks to a math model, and the math model does the math and gives us the answer, and then the large language model gives it back in human consumable, right? That's this chain of events. The problem is large language models are so good at language, but they're kind of missing this other piece that there's a bunch of people going and working on. So,
well, and I would argue with you that they're even good at the language aspect of
sure.
it, right? Which is, when you were talking, so there are a lot of things that we could unpack in all the things that you described, and we're starting to run short of time. But, one of the things I think is so very important to highlight is that and I'm trying to gather my thoughts here, is that when we've got large language, so two thoughts actually. One is, first, the concept of people just adopting an AI technology because it's the new shiny object and not knowing the problem that they're trying to solve with it, right? They just want to say that they are leveraging AI technologies. But then you have this mass confusion. You've got money being spent in places it doesn't need to be spent to support that technology that is not solving to a business problem. And I think that's where we need to do a better job just in general. But when you talk about the large language models, it amazes me that we are so willing to accept data, and where it does that isn't accurate, and where it gets a little scary is while on the DALI effort, it doesn't matter if you get it wrong. In the forecasting, you have to be at least 95% accurate because it's the livelihood of any organization when you talk about forecasting.
Yep,
whether it's forecasting for a business or forecasting sales, it doesn't really matter. It is what is driving decisions that can make or break an organization.
Yep,
I feel like language models sit in the middle of that, right? It isn't life threatening in general. Like, it's not going to kill a business for the most part if, when you get that data, you're actually going back and fact checking and ensuring that it's accurate, because there is such inaccuracy that it can be leveraged for bad, maybe not intentionally, but can be very hurtful and do damage to a business or even an individual if not accurately vetted.
Yes. And I got to talk about a specific technique that all of these systems use. When they give you an answer, they give you the answer in a confident tone of voice. They're taught to, you take language, you give the language to this interpreter, this large language model, it goes and gets the computer to give you something. But then when you get the result, it's only going to present the result in a confident tone of voice, even if it's not sure. And there's all kinds of examples of a large language model giving you a wrong answer, but sounding like it knows what it's talking about. And we've even seen, GPT will make up or give you fake links because it couldn't find the information it needed, but it knows that it has to give you something. And so it'll give you, right? Have you ever done that and gone and, like, if you get an answer from GPT and you click on, like, okay, well, where's the source behind this? And it doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist.
Right. So there's a whole field of statistics. I'm going to try not to get too nerdy here. But it's one of the things that makes a big difference in what we're doing. And it's this idea of telling the end user how confident we are in something. Now, if you're talking to a human, humans have tells, right? We have changes in our tone of voice. We have facial expressions. We have
body language
that communicates how certain we are with something. And so we as humans can interpret that additional information we're being given to recognize when this person is confident or not confident in their answers. A large language model, that doesn't exist. It was intentionally taken out, or rather it just was never designed in. I'm not going to try to say that they did this on purpose, but that's just the way it's. And so you're given, even if they're only 30% confident in the correct answer, they're still going to give it to you with a tone of voice that says, I'm 100% confident. Now, in my work in forecasting, it's actually really important for me to tell you if I don't know the answer, because your business is you're responding to the data differently if it's low confidence versus if it's high confidence. Now, that math exists. It's not very popular, and it's not used very often in big data applications, just because in big data applications, there's some statistical assumptions you can make that says, well, on average, if you get over a certain number of data points, then your error or your model error is going to be what's called homogeneous, or your model error will be the same all the time. That's actually incorrect. And we're starting to see that the way it's working out is just, I'm getting super nerdy. Okay.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
The point of this is to say, when you get a response from these AIs, recognize that you're missing the human tells. And so there's even stories. I've talked to a private equity guy who's an operator at a private equity. So his job is, just so you know what that is, his job is he sits on the board of directors for several companies that have taken millions of dollars of investments from the company he works for. There was a story he told me. He said he was in a presentation from a company, and they had a statement in one of their slides that they gave to all of their investors that he knew to be materially false. And but he didn't call him out. He was nice enough about it. He didn't call him out during the meeting, but he went back to them later and he said, "Hey, where did you get that data? Because it's wrong." And they said, "Oh, well, we got it from ChatGPT." And his response to them was like, "Hey, it's great if you use it. It's a fantastic, like, it gets you really good information a lot of times, but good Lord, don't trust it like that." Right. And so we're not used to thinking this way because we don't recognize that our brains do it automatically. Our brains automatically try to find uncertainty. They try to find whether or not they trust somebody. They try to understand whether or not they trust what's being said. But we don't have a way of doing that. We apply the idea of, well, ChatGPT was right about 80% of the things it told me, so I can trust it. Right? We try to say I can trust ChatGPT, but in reality, okay, yeah, you can trust it for 70 or 80% of the things it tells you, but you can't trust it and you're never going to know which ones you can or can't trust it for, which is
and I think there's a even larger problem at hand, which we probably don't even have time to dive into. But I always go back to, we also live in this society today where we are a bit, while when you're talking to an individual and you're having a conversation one-on-one, we tend to be a bit more skeptical. And unfortunately, we're less trusting as individuals. But when we talk about, like, I'll use this quick example. When the war happened or broke out between Israel and the Gaza Strip, right? You saw all of these, if you looked on Facebook, you saw all of these generic posts where everyone copied and pasted the history of Jerusalem and the Bible and all of these things. And they were then forming their own opinion about whether or not the war was right or wrong and whose side they were on, just based on these, I mean, it was a paragraph of facts, right?
Yeah.
And so they were just copying and pasting. So we're living in this world where we aren't, while when we're talking individually, one-on-one, we are more questioning, we are less trustful or less trusting, right? When we talk about things that are just spoken, like the issue on the war or ChatGPT output, it seems like we don't spend enough time trying to form our own opinion and taking enough time to actually research. We're taking what we're getting at face value and we're running with it, right? There's no way that everyone who pasted that truly can choose a side and truly understand what transpired or all of the history that transpired up until this point when that war broke out. Yeah. There's just no way. But they do that because they don't have time to research on their own, which is where the problem lies with ChatGPT. Yeah. Everyone takes it more for face value because they don't have time to go research it themselves.
Yeah. There's two pieces of this that I feel like we should touch on. The first is this idea that the thing that's more popular is more correct. And that's actually a, oh man, that's it's interesting because that is actually a social result of algorithms called search, right?
Yep.
And so what has happened is because we've said we've started to trust Google. Google's results are based on what's the most popular.
Yep.
It's really good at giving us what's the most popular, but that doesn't actually mean it's the most correct. Now, the whole Jerusalem Hamas thing that's a tough one to talk about, just because it's so like there's some really like there's both opinions on both sides. Now that's this idea at an extreme, but let's take it back a little bit and talk about we've now had a whole generation of I'm an in-betweenial, right? So I'm then this weird, like, I didn't have social media in high school, but yet I grew up with computers. There was about 4 years of people where that was true. And so I understand and grew up with computers, but I never was like, my social world didn't include social media. And what that means is I get how computers work, but there's not anything in my brain that's wired to care what random people on the internet think of. Now I do care. That's still a thing. It's still part of my social construct. It feels good to have recognition from masses. And so we have to recognize that just because something's more popular doesn't mean it's more correct. And so, well, how do you decide what's a source of truth, right? That's a whole problem we haven't solved. Now there is some math that can solve this problem, but we haven't applied it at scale yet, right? There's a whole source of truth in what we'll call propagation of uncertainty and propagation of error. And I'm not going to get into that today, because that's probably something that's going to take a couple years to solve with the right people in the room. But the point of that to say is the solution exists, but it's not being used today. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, let's go talk about a little bit of human psychology. And this is going to be something from, what's his name? He's a neuroscientist from Stanford, neurobiologist from Stanford. I can't believe I'm not remembering his name. He's got a YouTube channel. And oh man,
I'm going to see if I can search him up. Hold on. You keep talking.
Yeah, exactly. He's really popular, but it's I'm sure I'll think of it in a second. But he said there's something interesting about the human brain. The human brain is hardwired to do as little thinking as possible, because more thinking takes more calories, and we're trying to conserve calories. Like, if you think all the way back to the history of our humans, like we're trying to do as much as possible with the least amount of resources.
Andrew Huberman, by the way.
Andrew Huberman, yes, that guy.
Yeah.
And I love that he said this to me, because I use it all the time. And you have to recognize, how often is somebody, you're using the post example of those people that took that paragraph and just reposted it, right? Well, the right thing to do for all of those people would be to go, before they're willing to put it out there and say, this is what I believe, and therefore make it popular, would be for them to go and actually do the research themselves.
Yes.
However,
which is what I was trying to get at, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But the issue is our brains are hardwired to not do that. Our brains are intentionally trying to get as much output, whatever that ends up looking like, social output, social credit, social or beliefs. I don't know what you want to call it, for the least amount of work possible. And so what ends up happening is saying, it might have started out with, there was a group of people that all agreed on to this thing, but then it turned into, well, we don't just, now it's popular. And so because it's popular, it must be correct.
Yep.
Right. I do actually think that AI can solve a part of this problem. One of the reasons AI has helped me in my work, in my forecasting, is because I can tell it to go and let me use a very specific example. When I'm forecasting, let's say a company gives me we've got their financial statements, and we've got 360 different financial accounts that we have to forecast. If I individually have to go through and review all 360 financial accounts, it's going to take 3 to 6 weeks.
Right.
And it's a lot of really high intensity mental effort to go do that. And I'm going to get bored, and I'm going to not want to do it. And my brain, I'm just going to get sick of it. The advantage I have, because we've written an AI that goes and does that, is I can tell it, I can make it so the AI has to do it. The AI doesn't have this built-in, I'm trying to preserve calories thing.
Right.
So I can force it to go do that. Now, the advantage I have, and also just a real quick plug, the advantage I have is that it does 3 to 6 weeks worth of work in minutes, and it does it every single time, and it does it exactly the same way every time. And that's a huge advantage to the AI itself. Now, if we could figure out this source of truth math from a social perspective, that we may actually have part of the answer in some of our new tools that are available to solve this incorrect situation that we've become part of where the thing that's the most popular is the most true. Hopefully that happens. I don't know, maybe that's going to be the thing I go build next. Who knows, right? But there is that. Now that's me being optimistic, trying to find the silver lining. That's the kind of guy I am, right?
But we also need optimism in the world that we live in today. We could, if you think about what AGI, transhumanism, what Elon Musk is doing, what Sam Altman is doing in the technologies that they're investing in, if we allow ourselves, we could go down this negative path.
Yeah.
And we could allow it to overtake us, right? But if we have this level of optimism, I still believe that there's then hope. We still have the opportunity to change the trajectory of AI and how humans and AI function and live together in this world 20, 30, 40 years down the road. But only if we retain this optimism that enables us to be creative and think outside the box and actually take efforts that will not only create awareness, but also educate others so that we start thinking for ourselves again and not rely so heavily on AI. AI is an amazing tool and can be used for good, but it should never replace us.
Yeah, totally. And I think we can, recognizing the shortcomings of AI today, recognizing that AI is not good at telling us when it doesn't know, whereas we as humans are good at it's hard. It takes effort for humans to cover up when they don't know, is a way I would put it, right? Yeah. So it's hard. It's a skill set to cover up uncertainty. If we can recognize that that's the difference between us as humans and the current iteration of AI, and figure out, okay, that's a problem we have to go solve. Let's go solve the problem of AI. AI can't tell us when it doesn't know. Okay, yes, I know of, and I know that the math exists to solve that problem. It's just a matter of, is somebody in ChatGPT, is somebody at OpenAI going to do that? Is it going to have to be a new tool that's built from the ground up that way? I don't know the answer to that one yet, but I know it exists. I know it's possible. So hopefully that happens.
We'll see.
Yeah.
I think we have a lot, and this is solely why I do and hold these Caff-AI chats, and why I talk about AI so much, is because I am an AI enthusiast. I think that it has a lot of opportunity to continue to do good, and we've seen it especially in healthcare. But if I've
seen it happen in my companies, and I think the application, absolutely, there's so many amazing applications for it.
Exactly. But there are also some negative implications, not just in the way we use it, the false information that we receive from it, but also the future and what it looks like if we don't actually start to become more aware and educated. So having conversations like this are important because it shares some of the ways that AI is really being leveraged for the good and some of the exciting things that we see, but we talk about then what the negative implications are, because the reality is we've got to be more aware and more educated so that we can, in fact, potentially impact the trajectory of AI going forward. So that all being said, I realize that we are running close on time. So Nate, I'm super excited you were here with us today.
Thank you. This was fun. Thanks for letting me nerd out of some of the, I love the psychology and I love the math and AI, and it's just really fun to talk about.
I love it. Well, it was fun. And for those that it may have been a little too techy, the reality is we've got to get a bit more in the weeds to truly understand. We've got to really take the time to maybe not get super techie, but we do have to understand, because that really then provides the reasons why we have to become more aware and engaged, and why we have to potentially even be weary of the output that we get, and realize that that the output can be sometimes skewed or false. Those are all things. So I'm glad we geeked out. I had a really great time with that. I want to make sure that two things, you have an opportunity to share maybe just a parting thought, and the other with how we can engage with you. So on the bottom, you'll see the scroll. I've got Nate's LinkedIn handle. So you can most certainly DM him. But Nate, how's the best way we can find you? And leave us maybe with a parting thought.
Yeah. So the best way to find me is through LinkedIn or through my website. My website is betterforecasting.com. And I guess we can probably put a link in the chat to that.
Yes.
That would be a great way to do it. So the two ways that I work with companies is we do forecasting as a service, and we also provide technology for CFOs to make it easy for them to do the forecasting themselves. So we've got kind of that whole thing covered. Now, my parting thought, I think I'll say it this way. The biggest breakthroughs that I've made in moving from being wrong to being wrong less often in my work. Remember that trajectory that we talked about, right? It's really important to be wrong, not wrong very often. The biggest breakthrough that I've made in that space has been through quantifying and understanding that amount of error that's happening in my predictions. And so I think that for people that are trying to use AI to better themselves and better their businesses, if you add in the thought as you're looking at your output, how do I make sure I know how right or how wrong this output is? I think that you're going to go a long ways towards avoiding some of these pitfalls that we've talked about. And it's actually going to improve that's probably one of the most helpful questions or skepticisms you could apply to the outcomes. That's going to help you make it be better at using it and be better at being successful with what it's giving you.
I love that. So thank you for your parting thoughts. If you don't know how to engage with him, I mean, the most simple way is to make sure you reach out to him in the DMs. He's really good at getting back with you. He did just have a baby, so his time, well, he didn't, but his wife did, right? So he is slowly coming back and getting back into the swing of things, but he's always, you can always find him there, and you've got his website. We'll put it in the comments below. I want to thank everyone for being here today. I appreciate we usually don't go this long, but it was such fun and we had such great information to talk about. My parting thought would just be question everything. I mean, it is important. I talk about in sales just being curious. Apply that in every aspect of our lives, which includes output that you receive back from AI today. It's still not 100% accurate. And if we aren't willing to accept inaccuracies from humans, we've got to also be willing to accept inaccuracies with AI, which means that we've got to go out and research and qualify the data that we're getting. So that's my last thought. I want to thank everyone for being here. We're here every Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. Central, which is Houston, Texas time. And my next live will be Friday. So I talk about sales, AI, and humanity. And I have coffees with Denise on Friday. Super excited because we have Chris Hennessy joining us. And I look forward to seeing everyone in the comments here on LinkedIn. Go find and follow Nate. Amazing. And I can't wait to see his journey because he's got a lot coming up that we're going to see. I'm super excited for his future and the impact that he's having in the AI space. So thank everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Happy hump day, actually. And we'll talk to you soon. Stay on for just a minute. Hold on one second. I'll end the stream. And there we go. It's